My name's Alex Gittleson. I graduated 2008 from the University of Scranton. It was a comm major with a minor in Spanish. And for 4 years, I did the broadcast track. I always kind of knew I wanted to get into television and do content stuff. I loved getting behind the cameras in the studio. So I picked that major after doing actually a year undecided, come to think of it. So I did 3 years of communications. First year was undecided, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But the university got me to where I wanted to go by giving me kind of a little bit of a playground to play around in the television studio. Kevin Viking Lynn was the adjunct professor who got me involved with this stuff, and he was the one that kind of gave me the keys to play around with things. I developed a show at the university called Are You an Idiot? It was a game show in the television studio, and it was 3-on-3, and it'd usually be like housemates or roommates, and it was trivia, and we kind of had a sarcastic, irreverent host who would roast them while he asked them questions. So like, just having the freedom to do that. I mean, granted, we did it on our own time, but it was like an extracurricular thing that we got credit for. It was able to, I had a class with Kevin at the time, and we were able to translate some of those learnings, those hands-on learnings into the classroom. I would say giving me that sandbox to play around was how the university got me to where I wanted to be.
So when you were in school, what did you think you would be doing now, like as an adult?
I always figured I would be in television. This is like 2000, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. I was thinking by the time I got out, I would work in television. I thought I would have to like start at some far-flung place and be a like production assistant in Tuscaloosa, Alabama for 2 years in order to get to like Milwaukee. Like I was worried that was what I was going to have to do, and I really didn't want to do that. At the time when I graduated, New York was the number one market, LA was the number two, and that's how we looked at it. And then I might have to go to 43 or 57 or whatever. But I just knew I wanted to go to New York, so I actually got really lucky. I interned in 2006 as a sophomore going into junior year at MTVU, and MTVU was like the shit back then. It was the coolest thing. This is pre really like social media, super highway everywhere you turn. This is before social media on phones. Like MTVU is where people would go to figure out what was cool, new song, new artist. And so I got lucky and got an internship there, and that I was able to meet people from doing that and working hard and having a good attitude and raising my hand for runs and to, make lists of celebrities to whatever, try to cast for some show. Because of my attitude, I was able to make some great contacts there. And 2 years later, I did a year in between junior going to senior year where I stayed in Scranton, and I worked for a local small production house, and we took on a gig for a couple local organizations. I think we did some pro bono stuff. But when I graduated in 2008, within 2 weeks after making a couple phone calls, my intern coordinator at MTVU, who I called to say like, hey, I graduated and I'm looking for a job, and some other contacts I had made through that job, I was introduced to a producer at NBC who 2008, they were doing, they were just starting to do like kind of lower impact productions where like there was like 2 shooters as opposed to 8, and like a gaff and grip crew and lighting crew and like a whole big footprint. Like NBC was starting to play around with kind of lower lift productions where like shooters were also producers and lighting people. And that's what this show Open House was doing in 2008. For LXTV, which just a year and change beforehand had been bought up by NBC. So my first job was a freelancer at NBC doing lifestyle content from, I was 22. So I just was kind of taking some of that camera knowledge from the U and bringing it into this workplace, but with a whole different set of gear, a whole different style of everything, but with the same attitude that I learned at the U of like, just throw it at me, like whatever it is, I'll do it, I'll get it done. And so I got super lucky in that I only spent 2 weeks in a recession, 2008. That was the last recession. looking for a gig before this NBC one fell on my lap, and I stayed there for 5 years after that. I was a production assistant going to all these different reaches, shooting mansions in like Ridgewood and like, Oyster Bay Cove on Long Island and like Greenwich, Connecticut, just going everywhere within an hour of New York. Me and like 2 other guys with a bunch of camera stuff. And then we would, meet up with some real estate broker and they'd say, here's the den, here's the foyer, here, this chandelier is made out of crystals. And we would have to shoot everything. And that's how I learned camera stuff. Like just being an assistant to 2 really talented producer shooter type guys who were probably 26 at the time and I was 22. And they just taught me everything I need to know about the camera. They moved up at NBC. They took me with them. I was a production assistant, then I was production assistant, then assistant producer, then associate producer, then segment producer over the course of 5 years. And I was the point guy on a segment called Open House to the Rescue, which was just when like home improvement television was getting big, like HGTV was just coming onto the scene and people loved looking into other people's homes. And I was the like second in command. I had a producer and I was the AP by then, doing Open House to the Rescue with this host, George Oliphant on NBC. Now George to the Rescue. So we were doing that segment. We'd have to deliver 1 7-minute package a week, essentially, where we were like showing someone in the Bronx how to do base molding, or someone in Watchung how to rewire the chandelier, whatever. So we were doing like little projects, and then NBC liked it and they wanted to make a show out of it. So I was at 25 or so on the ground floor of a national show on NBC, weekly show, Home Improvement, they wanted to get into.
That's
so
crazy.
It was me, one other guy.
Like crazy exciting.
Yeah, it was really exciting. I mean, here, I don't know can you see the Emmys up there? That was from that show. So the show that we eventually developed we called George to the Rescue because George was the talent in it, and there was a certain benefit to having your name in the show title. You kind of permanently tied to it. So we pitched George to the Rescue. They liked it. We did 4 episodes. I want to say the pilot season, the first season, 4 episodes, like 2 pilots and then 2 episodes. It was a weird buy. And then they doubled it. And then we did 8 the next season. And then they doubled it. And we did 16 the following season. So it was like this really exciting time between 2012. It was like 2010 and 2013 for me. That was developing the show, growing it, getting it bigger, getting bigger sponsors, Chevy, Home Depot, like all these big folks started signing on. They gave us a car. We got to drive around this big Chevy. So, and like the project's getting bigger. We did a woman in North Carolina. She was at her bachelorette party. She was like 24 years old or something like that. One of her bachelorette friends pushed her in the pool and she broke her neck falling in the pool.
Oh my God.
So we built her a whole elevator, a whole addition of the house, made everything handicap accessible. I was in North Carolina. So I stayed around for like 3 seasons, I want to say. Probably did like 30. I mean, we did 100 plus Open House to the Rescues, and I probably did like 35 or 40 George to the Rescues before I just kind of hit my cap at NBC, which will happen. You'll find, you spend a certain amount of time at a place and you kind of hit your ceiling of how much you can grow there. And that's an important thing to recognize when that happens. But we did that, won a couple statues, and then I jumped over to a strictly development role at ABC. It was Disney ABC for 2.5 years. It was developing cable pitches, similarly to how we developed George from a segment, grew it into a show, and then sold it and had all these sponsors. ABC hired me for 2.5 years just to work with the people who were doing the audience surveys and figuring out what was hot in the market, what people wanted to see, holding meetings with Travel Channel, holding meetings with ABC Family, holding meetings with HGTV, DIY Network, and just kind of hearing what, they wanted and figuring out a way to either do that, hire a team and make something based around what they're looking for, or cultivate it into something that's like more of our voice. But it was a strictly development producer role. It was really cool. I mean, they sent me to Hawaii, Alaska, Montana, San Francisco.
Wow.
They sent me all around to shoot these shows. I lived in LA for 2 months on Disney's dime. Lived in Dallas for 6 weeks, doing barn shows. Anyway, what was the original question again? Did I answer it?
Yeah, you did. It was like, how did the university lead you to where you are now?
Oh
So
yeah.
good
Okay.
answer.
We're only one
Well,
question
and now
in
you're
now.
at and now you're at Bloomberg for quick takes. So how I would say that's a different field or
Totally
different
different
sort
field.
of
So, well, if we want to
I
continue
say personality,
chronologically,
I guess.
totally different. I mean, it's a news gig, and I had never done news before I took this role. But I mean, to continue chronologically, I did development, cable producing, back into the field, shooting, coming up with reads and story arcs and casting, so we sold shows to Travel Channel, sold shows to DIY Network, HGTV. I did a show called Flipping Moms Flipping Homes in LA. Breaking Barns with Shane Golden, which never actually even saw the light of day. We did this whole big 30-minute show, and the network saw it, and they're like, we don't want it to air this even. So ups and downs along the way. Then feature documentaries for a year and a half for Netflix and for other places. So then I got even longer in my run time of the things I was making. 90 minutes or so was how long those movies were. And then I did freelance work, so like whatever. That's how I got introduced to shorter form, because it's always been television shows like 30 minutes, pilots, sometimes up to 40 minutes plus, then movies 90 minutes, and then doing freelance work and being hired by IBM, being hired by ESPN, being hired by like all these crazy different places, and doing everything, Forbes, doing everything like myself. Like it was basically like, shoot 4 episodes of this, like, and just tell us how much it costs. So it would behoove me very much to figure out a way to do it efficiently, to do it in a cost-effective manner, and do it in a way that I could, expand a profit margin for my little production company, Gittleson Productions LLC at the time. So I took a bunch of gigs, like 40 clients. My wife works at Refinery 29. Have you ever heard of Refinery 29?
Mm-hmm.
So Refinery 29 hired me a dozen times. Vice, a number of places. So I did that, and then that is when I found Bloomberg, and Bloomberg found me, I should say. My friend from NBC. The one thing that's critical, Kayla, in your whole career is your connections, your friendships, the people that you work alongside, the bonds you forge. They will outlast any gig at any company, any role. You hold on to those, and you will have always a door open for you somewhere. So my friend that I started with as an assistant at NBC in 2008, Trey, who went to UCLA, then he was at NYU Film School, then he dropped out because it was too expensive, and he just got a gig at NBC doing the same production assistant work as me. He would come with me to Ridgefield and all these places, and we'd have to shoot the homes. He went a bunch of different places, Dateline NBC, then he went to Vox, and he was an executive producer at Vox for a couple of years, and then Bloomberg found him, and they brought him over as the global head of content for digital video. And when Mike Bloomberg got on stage at South by Southwest with the Twitter founder, Jack Dorsey, and announced a totally vetted 24/7 news network that was going to premiere on Twitter, Trey called me and said, I think you'd be good to be a senior leader with this. And I went in, had an interview with the deputy editor-in-chief, all the way down, president of media, global head of content for Quick Take, all the big wigs. 5-tier interview in one day. It was like 6 hours or so. They ran a full background check. Yeah, it was so intense. Full background check, wait 2 weeks. We went all the way into my credentials, all the way into my resume. They called all my former managers. They it was just super duper crazy vetting process. But
you made it.
Yeah, they offered me the role. Like it was like 6 weeks or so later, they called me up and they're like, hey, we do want you. So that was December 2017. So I signed on to do, essentially with no news experience whatsoever, to cover news for 3 of the most hectic news years in history.
Seriously.
Yeah. So that was a little bit of a trial by fire thing. So the original question for this little sequence Isn't that flexing a different muscle? Isn't that something totally different? The answer is absolutely yes. What they had at the time was they had a newsroom full of people that knew how to write you a news story, that knew how to background check, that knew how to like vet things, that knew how to have multiple sources, that knew how to responsibly report, but they didn't know video. Hardly any of them knew video. So they
And
had
that's
some
where you
people who
came
only
in.
edited. They had some people that like knew how to shoot camera but didn't really edit. And they brought me in to teach everybody everything and to do it kind of trial by fire style. They gave me a team to run the weekends. So I had Saturday, Sunday in a totally empty office building at Bloomberg because they didn't have any weekend coverage because mostly they cover the stock market, which is closed on Saturdays and Sundays. So in this totally empty building is me and like 7 other people that are my team. I had 3 producers, 3 editors, and 1 social curator. And they're like, okay, you guys are in charge. And for 2.5 years, I ran the weekend team. We carved out a path where it was kind of like my 2 favorite worlds, like the mini doc, like, you know, proper camera, cinematic, like beautifully shot, nice story arc, you know, maybe 7 minutes is our sweet spot these days, as short as 3 for these mini docs. So half of that, and then half of like the quick turn text over videos, the breaking news stories, the stuff that Bloomberg really wanted to push, which I'll do. And there's a major appetite for on Twitter, especially, which is where we were at the time exclusively for a year. And then we opened up to Instagram, Facebook, and everything. But to do that at a company that really prided themselves on that definitely was a trial by fire for me. And learning how to tell breaking stories. And there were some crazy stories that broke over that time on the weekends. First death of coronavirus in the US was on our watch on a Saturday. There was a synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh that was on a Saturday. I remember there were some insane Hong Kong protests during their fight for democracy like a 1.5 years or so ago that were on the weekends. I'll remember those weekend days of like covering the breaking stories for like 10 hours with a team of 7 people for a long time. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy that like you had never been in that position and then you come in this position and they're like, okay, here's stuff that you've never done before. And they get like the world just gives you the most content. Like you said, like the craziest 3 years
I think it
of
was
history.
definitely
Like, here you
an
go,
unusual
Alex.
position. Yeah, I know. I think it was unusual. They like to say, stood on the shoulders of giants through that period of time. I had such a qualified team. They're all still at Bloomberg doing different new things that are exciting. But I had such a qualified team. I had guys from CBS. I had a woman that came from ABC. I had one woman who was just out of college, but she was really great. A guy from NBC spent there like 10 years there. And then I had folks that came from like BuzzFeed and like had like cooler, like totally different styles. Eventually got one woman from Now This, who was really great. So doing that with such a qualified team that, you know, Bloomberg puts us through training and we are given resources and know like how to do our jobs. But certainly, yeah, the news cycle of the last 3 years definitely tested us at times.
So what would you say your favorite position has been like this far?
My whole career?
Yeah, like since 2008
Yeah.
to now. Like what would you say your favorite position has been? Or I guess the position that you had the most experience with, or however you want to answer that.
I mean, my favorite one was definitely, there's a bit of a tie. The doing the documentaries for Quixotic Endeavors that we sold to Netflix and beyond, the feature films, 90 minutes. That was so exciting for me because that was my first like foray into really like nitty gritty cinema, like 2 people shooting something for Netflix in the field, like 2 people bringing just enough suitcases and packing just smart enough to be able to go to Ireland and then Scotland and then go to, you know, Marrakesh, Morocco with just a couple of suitcases and be able to shoot something that would, you know, be stitched together into a beautiful feature film that gets picked up at film festival and like put on streaming services. That was really cool. It was definitely a disruptive style of filmmaking and of production as a whole. where you just had to do everything, but I really do thrive when I have to do everything. So that was my most exciting to that point. And then taking all those learnings and doing my own thing for a year and change right before Bloomberg. I took all those learnings of like being able to shoot something that looks really nice, sounds really nice, has a very cool feel with, increasingly few people until it was, Forbes hired me to do a few episodes of something called The Great Rewrite, which was, they funneled it through a production company in New York called Efren Films, but they hired me to run point on the production, pre-production. Like I would book all the episodes and then I would actually go out and shoot them all myself. Like I did it for a few times with an assistant, and then I was like, I can do this all myself. Just let me try it. And if you don't like it, like I'll never do it myself again. And I presented it in a way that it behooved them, it behooved me, and it challenged me to consider my equipment, to consider my shot choice, to consider my everything in advance. So I'd have to really be very deliberate about the planning. And it really taught me to focus like on the craft, on the nitty gritty of what you need to get a cohesive, compelling video, because I had no one to turn to except for myself.